This is my second trip to Hungary. I came in 2000. I went to visit Tokaj, and I went to see Disnoka and then to see the other Tokaj Renaissance companies, and it was just a revelation, really a revelation, and such exceptional wines and such interesting people making them, and such a speciality like sherry. It's something that nobody else makes. When did I taste sherry first? That's an interesting question. Going back in my mind, I first tasted it. I lived in Spain for 3 months before I went to university. We call it a gap year. So I went to Spain, and there was this wonderful country where I, as a quiet northern girl from cold northern Europe, suddenly found this open, lively country with lovely people. When I went south, particularly Andalúzia was a place that fell in my heart. And they had this drink which was so distinctive, and it's so related to me, Andalúzia and sherry. And then as a student we did this very extraordinary thing, very British thing to do, which was when you sat with your teacher, you read him out your essay and you discussed your subject, then they would give you a glass of sherry. So for me, from age 18, I was drinking sherry very regularly as a student. I didn't drink beer, didn't drink cider. I drank a bit of wine, but sherry, and I think about it now, and it must have been warm Fino. I don't think it came from a fridge, so it was warm Fino, and it probably was not fresh, not very fresh. But I remember some favourite brands then, and that started me off drinking sherry, and I've never stopped. Sherry is something that I've known about. I just kept on drinking, and I think for quite a long time it was very fashionable in England, and then it's become a very unfashionable drink. So I used to go on drinking it, but I was aware that my friends were drinking sparkling wines, or they were drinking wine from New Zealand, or they lost the taste for this wine that's not fruity. And so and then after working as a journalist for a number of years, I began to specialise in wine and wine writing, and I took the exams to become a Master of Wine. And for that, I had to choose a special subject, and I thought, right, I'm going to choose sherry. That's the thing I really love, and I'm going to tell the world about sherry. I'm going to research it, and now I spend a lot of time talking around the world about sherry and why it's such a great drink. Well, in fact, I think the first thing to do is you have to drink it. So I think don't worry about the learning. I mean, it is useful to spend a bit of time learning, but I think first of all you have to drink it. And the one thing with learning about sherry is you need to eat with it. I think the most important thing to understand is that when you're down in Jerez, they don't just drink the sherry. They'll have some salted almonds, they'll have some ham, maybe some cheese, something like that, so that it's a very good way of drinking. Whereas in England, maybe we just drink. But in Spain, they match the food and the wine, and it makes it better. So you start off maybe with a wine like this, a lighter style. It's called a Fino or a Manzanilla, and that's the one you get to know, and I think that's the best way to begin. And then gradually you can understand that from the same grape they make lots of different wines. But in a way it's exactly the same as if you think about something like Tokaj. I spent a long time reading textbooks about Tokaj, but actually if you understand it's basically the two same grapes, and it comes from one place, and it just depends on when and how you pick it. Hungarians understand that completely. They just know what the styles are, and gradually you can do that with sherry. I think a good place to do it is in a restaurant with a sommelier who understands, or in a bar, somebody who can open a bottle and give you the chance to taste. But certainly it takes a bit of time to learn, for sure. Sherry had this wonderful drink, unique around the world, and sherry was immensely popular, and then its sales dropped and dropped and dropped. But what's happened in recent years is they've worked really hard on the quality, and they've also done things. They've issued old wines. They've made a particular thing about celebrating their very old wines, which are 20 and 30 years old. And they've realized that sherry goes well with lots of kinds of food. And I think really now people don't say, I think you have to change your mind about sherry. So for instance in Japan it goes really well with sushi. So you say, here's a wine that has fascinating, it's just perfect, this wine with sushi. Or you say, you talk to people in different countries about the different foods, and then they see that sherry is an international drink. It can work anywhere, in any style. So I think we have, those of us who love sherry, and the producers in the south have to get out there and talk about it and get people to sample it. But it was seen, I know, I accept in England as a very traditional drink, but we now have to change that and make it a thing you drink in bars, and it's a very young drink. And this, you see, it's cool, it's lovely, we're serving it at a nice fresh temperature, and it's a really refreshing drink. I think that you can really have sherry with so many types of things. So for instance, if you have fish and you have particularly kinds of what we would call oily fish, but they're the richer fish, not the white fish, then this goes perfectly with something like that. If you have a meat dish with quite a rich sauce, then if you take one of the bigger styles, one of the darker colours. The great thing about sherry is it produces these lovely dark coloured wines which have really, really complex aromas and flavours. They may look dark, but they're young and fresh, and those go perfectly with a very dark meat thing. So I'm convinced that actually sherry is the one drink that you can drink all the way through a meal. There's a type of sherry to suit every kind of food. You'll say to me, of course you'd say that, you're an enthusiast. But actually, it seems, because it's not a fruity wine, I think what you need to understand about sherry, it's not fruity, but it's fresh and complex. Then actually, it's the ideal food wine. And it has it has savoury characters, again, which make it really complementary to food. So I think wherever you come from, whatever style of food you eat, then I think there are right sherries to go with it. I think it's very interesting because we have, for instance, in England for a very long time we had Italian restaurants, but in fact many of them had Spanish people cooking in them and serving. But now at last we are getting people who are Spanish, and they're making wonderful tapas bars. And I think what we learned from that is there's a very cheap and good and easy way for hotels and bars to serve sherry, and that's with a cold plate. So you don't need to cook anything, and you're going to have some almonds, some cold ham of some kind or other, maybe some cheese. A very simple thing to assemble, so you don't even need very trained staff to do it, and that's the ideal thing to have with sherry because it has complex flavours. You need quite a lot of different things to have with it, and you need bread. You always need bread or breadsticks, so it can be quite economical too. If you just choose to have the bread and the olives, or the bread and the almonds, or maybe a bit of fish. Or you can do a little omelette made from eggs and potatoes. Or, yes, potatoes in a spicy sauce. This is very good with spicy food. You know, if you've got some Hungarian paprika, then you're going to have sherry with it. But I do think restaurants don't have to make Spanish food. What they need to say is, what is it that we like to eat? Is it sausages? Is it salamis? You know, salami goes perfectly with different kinds of sherries. So I think actually that's a very good way to begin, to say, okay, we're going to offer you a plate, and it will have a mixture of cold meats on it and a glass of sherry. And people will say, oh, what is this new drink? I normally have a beer, but they'll find that sherry really works perfectly with it. So I think that's a very good way to begin to educate people about what it's all about. I met this is exactly why I wanted to do this. I met two people who'd never drunk sherry before in their lives, and they really liked it. And I just thought, and they talked to me about Amontillado and Pedro Jimenez and about Manzanilla. So they were already using the words and understanding that from just 2 or 3 grape varieties you can produce 10 different wines. It's very exciting. And they said, now we'll go off and look, and that's really what you want to do. But I understand that really you need to do a tasting. Somehow or other we've got to get these wines into consumers' hands, and they need to have them a little bit explaining. It's a wine that needs educating. All wines need education, but there's something about sherry that needs just a bit more help, certainly. So I was very pleased. The other thing I was pleased about was that people all like the different wines. So some people like Manzanilla, some like Fino. Some people like Amontillado, but others preferred Palo Cortado. Others like the Oloroso and others the PX. So the room was completely mixed. And that proved to me that there's not one style of sherry for everyone. You need to have maybe 3 different bottles so that you can service different customers' needs and your own choices at home to keep people satisfied. We have now a very interesting thing in London is one day a year, it's coming up soon, there is a fortified wine tasting, and it's a big hotel and it has sherry, port, Madeira, Australian wine, French wine, every kind of fortified wine, and it's a chance for those of us who love those wines and sell them and the students to go around and taste them. So that's one way of doing it. There are quite a lot of times when the companies who import the wines do specialist tastings. They understand they need to do teaching, so you often find a big brand will help. And then I do quite a lot of specific essays, sessions for students to think just about sherry and to wine and port in the same way, another wine that needs help, specifically focused on sherry and port. So yes, I think it's something that needs extra time. It's just like the sweet wines of the world, you know, Sauternes, Tokai, the rest. You need to sit down and work out why each one is different. But there's no substitute for travelling. And I do think that Jerez is one of the nicest wine production zones to go to in the world. It's a very lively and exciting place. It has fairs and festivals. The wines are good, the countryside is lovely, the food is great, and the weather is always good. So I think that that's for a student, that's something really worth thinking about, to find some way of getting to Jerez, for sure. Possibly in the UK, we have had a lot of marketing towards Manzanilla and Fino, really a lot. So they're really being sold as something you have in a wine bar. You come in after a day's work, you have a nice cool glass of Fino and some nuts. So I think that if you do it to a British audience, more of them would probably recognise the Fino and the Manzanilla. That's because it's familiar. And they might say, oh, we don't drink sweet wines. So they might find a Pedro Jimenez with lots and lots of sugar. They find that harder to like. But I think what was lovely was that both the English customers I know and the Hungarian people I met today all agreed that they really liked Amontillado, Palo Cortado, or Oloroso. They love the complexity. Despite the fact the wines are brown in the glass, they look like they might be oxidized. They're fresh and they're lively and they're young, and finally I think what's really good about them is they're really good value. Because there hasn't been a very good market for sherry, the prices are relatively quite low for an old wine. You can buy a 20-year-old sherry for a very low price. So they're complex, they're very interesting, they go with food. So I was very excited to be able to find some new people who would really love sherry. I think that it's a wine to try. It may come from a little area in Spain, just 3 towns in a corner of Spain. It's a unique product, a bit like Tokai, which comes just from a little place, but it's a globally unique wine, and I think it's just something that people should try. They should come to it new and just give it a chance. It's so interesting. It leaps out of the glass at you, and it's a very unique wine. So I think it's something to try, and you'll find the wine you like for the right occasion.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.